Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Fast Forward Diversity Inclusion. I am Hannah Wilson, and my co-host is Isa Buencamino. And we are hosting today's webcast, which is the 10th in our pilot series of 12 conversations with leading diversity and inclusion advocates. The idea of our webcast is to create a series of conversations to move the diversity and inclusion agenda forward, to tap into what has happened and the experience and expertise of our guests. Each conversation fast forwards our D&I orientation, allowing us to build on this legacy. So Isa, who do we have on the show today?
Good morning, everyone. So our guest today is Ray Vincent. Ray is a retired Baptist minister who is an advocate of same-sex marriage. He now works as a part-time chaplain at the University of South Wales. The very first time he came out completely and publicly as a gay man to a church congregation was at the age of 80. So he now actively campaigns for LGBT acceptance and was named Stonewall's Gay Role Model of the Year in 2019. So welcome, Ray. So first of all, we want to ask you how you came to become a champion of LGBT. How did it all begin for you?
It's quite a long story, actually. I was very slow coming out, relatively late in life. Through middle age, I was out to a few friends, but not very much. When I was a minister in a church, I sometimes expressed my views about the sexuality issue, but never actually came out to the congregation. Over the years, a number of people, and I'm very thankful for this, a number of people, friends, have encouraged me, supported me, sometimes challenged me to come out further. When I started working for the University of South Wales chaplaincy, the chaplain encouraged me again to be a bit more open and to be a bit active on that field. And so he appointed me as the chaplaincy's LGBT champion. Then we got involved with Stonewall, and we set up role models, and my profile went on the university website as one of the role models, and it just escalated from there, really, until eventually I came out publicly, or as in a church meeting, and then on Facebook, and now, there's no point in hiding anything.
Thank you, Ray, for sharing your journey, because what I'm hearing is that kind of interweaving of your personal and your professional narrative and how you've shared your personal identity within your professional world. And I'm just interested to hear a little bit more about the church's stand on LGBT. We know there's quite a political tension between faith and sexual orientation. And I was just wondering whether you could expand on that a little bit for us.
Yes, there are only a few minority Christian groups who really are open about acceptance, complete acceptance of LGBT people. There's the Metropolitan Community Church, which was set up deliberately as an inclusive church. The Quakers, the Unitarians, some of the Anglican churches. I think the Episcopal Church in America. It is very open. It has at least one, I think there are 2 gay bishops. The Church of Scotland is a little bit more open. Church in Wales is a bit more open than the Church of England. But generally speaking, the main churches they're more open than they were, more tolerant, more understanding, but they haven't got round to actually saying that sex between members of the same gender is not a sinful thing. They just haven't got round yet to saying that.
Right. So, I'm Christian, Ray. I was born, raised Catholic, and I was taught love is love, right? Love is love. So why is it that, some churches are beginning to be a bit more visible and supportive of it, and some are not? What is the debate? What is the debate that you're having between the different churches?
The the issue is partly biblical fundamentalism, because there are passages in the Bible that seem to say that same-sex relationships are wrong. People take this up, but of course there are different ways of interpreting those passages, and there isn't anything in the Bible that really fits the situation of two people in love with each other. It's underneath the biblical and theological things, there's a psychological angle as well. The Christian churches, unfortunately, have always been very uneasy about sex. They really, many of them deep down don't really like the idea that people actually enjoy sex. and there's also the sense of male superiority as well, because some of the sex between men in the Bible was to do with a conquering army humiliating the soldiers of the enemy by raping them. And that was considered very degrading to a man, because it was making a man into a woman, which was degrading him. And there's that background of male superiority. And there's also the idea that there's an ordained order of creation that laid down in the very beginning. This is the way that God created the world, and this is the order of creation. This is the way it should be, and always must be. But of course, today we think more in evolutionary terms. There isn't an ordained, laid down order of creation from the very beginning. Life is moving onwards, and the whole world is evolving. So that's the kind of theological debate that goes on, but as I say, a lot of it is psychological as well.
Ray, this is a masterclass. There's so much wisdom there in what you've shared already. There's so many questions that I've got in my head. I wanted just to zoom in on some of the language you used there. You said that some churches are more inclusive, and I'm not a massively religious person. I am christened. My grandmother was very religious. I went to Sunday school, but my understanding of churches is about belonging. It's about community. It's about inclusion. It's about kindness and love. And there's a big ongoing debate about these words of acceptance and tolerance. I'm just interested in this kind of like conflict, I guess, between the messages of religion, and then we're basically saying that some people aren't welcome. That if you're in a same-sex relationship, then we're inclusive, but we're not inclusive. I'm just interested in what you think about that as a kind of a concept, about perhaps the mixed messages.
Yes, there are very mixed messages. And in practice, many of the churches now are much more open and understanding. They won't take that step and say it's okay to be gay and to practice it. But even the Pope has said things that suggest that he understands something about gay people, and certainly other most churches are in fact much more open and tolerant than they claim to be. Somebody has once said that it's time the Church of England started preaching what it practices. In fact, they're quite open and helpful and supportive to individual LGBT people, but they won't actually say it's okay.
Ray, first of all, I want to acknowledge your courage. I mean, considering how many people haven't found the courage to actually do anything about it, the fact that you are doing something is amazing. So I want to ask you about, because you do a lot of awareness sessions, right, at the university, at church. What do you teach? What is it that, what do you teach, and what do people ask about the most?
Well, first, when you talk about my courage, I don't regard myself as a model of courage at all. I came out quite late in life, really, and there are other people who have been out for many, many years. Christian people, the founders of the lesbian and gay Christian movement, for instance, who who were openly gay long before I was. So I don't see it as a great act of courage. But the awareness events that we hold, I mean, are meant, well, are meant rather like this broadcast really, to educate people a bit about the issues, and also to be a reassurance to people who are having difficulty with the issues, and to remind people that it still is a problem. You know, the general attitude in society today tends to be much more tolerant, and lots of people are openly gay, and people seem to be quite happy about it, and the law protects LGBT people and so on, and there's same-sex marriage. But I think we have to remind people, as we know from the news last night, that there is still a problem, that there is still a lot of anti-gay feeling, and particularly it's difficult for trans people. Um, I mean, I know I've actually met young people today who have been thrown out by their families because they said they were gay. So, you know, there still is a problem that needs to be dealt with, and we need to remind people of that.
I'll pick up on that idea of education, because as a teacher, a lot of our audience are educators as well, working in schools and educational organisations. And the British values dictate that we have to teach tolerance, but a lot of us would advocate that actually we should be teaching acceptance. And I think if we think about, thank you for referencing what's happened in the news overnight. So we know there's been another spate of hate crime in the West Midlands where the LGBTQ community have been attacked and there's been stabbings. I mean, how can we as society move this forward when it comes to how we treat people? Like, where's the humanity gone in society that we treat people who are different to us in this way? And is it right for us to be tolerating people, or should we be leading with accepting people and accepting people's choices?
Well, complete acceptance is the thing. I mean, toleration isn't the thing. You know, I mean, one friend of mine, when I came out to him, just looked at me for a few seconds and said, "Congratulations." And you know, that's the sort of attitude that we need. And well, some of us just have to set that example as best we can, and to make people aware of it.
Now, going back to what you said earlier about courage, I just recently, I think I wrote about it last night, about finding time to be courageous, because sometimes it takes time to be courageous. There's some things that you can be courageous about seconds before you can call forth courage, but there's some things that takes a while before you can build up courage. I mean, 80 years. How was it like? How was it like being, a gay man all these years and not feeling like you can tell everyone? I mean, you've gone through decades. I mean, you've lived this really, really, really long time. I mean, how was it like at the beginning, in the middle, at the end? Did the world change? Is that why you finally found the courage? Because back then you couldn't. Why did you finally feel like it was okay now?
Well, when I was young, of course, sex between men was a criminal offence, but homosexuality was never talked about. And in some ways, as a Christian growing up, it was a bit easier then, even than it is now, because today people who are brought up in very conservative churches constantly hear themselves being condemned from the pulpit. In my young days, it was never mentioned, and I didn't know anything about it. It was when I was about 17 that I came across the word homosexual, and thought, what does that really mean? And I looked it up in the dictionary, and it suddenly dawned on me that that was me. And in a way, it was good news and bad news. It was good news in the sense that my feelings weren't absolutely unique. But then, if there's a word for it, there must be other people. But it also bad, of course, in the sense that homosexuality was always mentioned as a perversion or a crime or a problem. And I kept this under wraps for a very, very long time. I was really terrified of anybody finding out. Not that I don't think I was ever convinced in myself that it was wrong, because it was just a loving and beautiful thing. But I just was aware that society generally and the church was regarded as completely taboo. And strangely enough, the time around about the age of 17 when I first realized there was a name for what my feelings were, was just about the same time that I began to feel called to the ministry. So the two have gone together right through. But the world has changed, and that's partly why it's easier now to come out. The People gradually began to accept that there is such a thing. There was the change of the law, of course, in 1967, when consensual sex between adults in private was no longer a crime. Between adult men in private was no longer a crime. But there was a lot of trouble after that. There was still a lot of arrests, a lot of persecution. And then, of course, in the 80s came AIDS, which in a sense first had a bad effect and then began to have a better effect, because first people were absolutely panicking about it, and afraid that, even if you drink from the same cup as a gay man, you're going to get AIDS any moment. There was this panic about it, but then people began to find out, of course, that there were some quite respectable and well-liked people in society who were gay, and they hadn't known. And that, in a sense, led to a bit more acceptance. People began to realize that quite normal people were gay. And now, then, of course, we came on to, the notorious Clause 28, which meant that people were very inhibited about talking about homosexuality, and the teachers were afraid to talk about it with their classes. Fortunately, that was abolished after 15 years, and then of course we had civil partnerships and gay marriage. So the world has changed enormously in my time.
What a journey you've walked, Ray. I love that social historical lens you're giving us and the way you've walked us through those kind of pivotal milestones in your own life, but also in how society has evolved and changed. I just want to go back to, you talked about the kind of the psychological effects and impact, and I'm interested in this idea of psychological emotional safety. And was that perhaps the context to why you felt the time was right for you to come out with your congregation, because there was that acceptance and that belonging, and what you just shared there about public figures who people respect, admire and trust come out and people already know who they are? I'm just interested in that pivotal moment of you coming out to your congregation.
Yes, the first time I came out to a public meeting of any kind was in connection with the chaplaincy. We had a speaker who was talking about his own journey from the usual conservative Christian attitude to acceptance of gay people, and how regretful he was about what he had thought. He happened to mention that day was Coming Out Day, 10th of October, and I hadn't been aware of that up to then. And I was asked to give the vote of thanks to the speaker, and I thought, well, I've got to do it. So I said, well, thank you. That meant a lot to me because I'm a gay man. That was the first time I came out in any sort of public meeting. That was some years ago now, well, 5 or 6 years ago, I think. And then in my own church, where I'm a member since retiring from full-time ministry, it's a very accepting church. We had a film. We usually have a monthly film evening when we watch a film and discuss it. And this film was about sexuality issues. I volunteered, instead of having the normal discussion, I volunteered to be interviewed about my own experience, because I just felt that the conversation is so often about those people, those gay people, those lesbians, those trans people, etc. And not including the people themselves. And I thought, well, let's make this a discussion that's real. That we're actually talking about it with someone who is gay. And so I volunteered to be interviewed, and the minister interviewed me, and I talked about my experience, and had a tremendously warm reception. It was a very, very heartwarming experience, and that was really great.
So when you came out to the congregation, Ray, once it was publicly out, did anything change for you? What changed?
I was surprised at the number of people who accepted me, and um, I've been surprised ever since, really, that people that I thought were rather old-fashioned in their views have, come to know that I'm gay. And but actually, incidentally, after this experience of the church meeting, I came out on Facebook, so made it really public. Um, and I was surprised then of the people who thought, and I also felt much more relaxed. Um, and another interesting thing is that coming out encourages other people to come out to you. I found very often when I've come out to a friend, they've started talking about something about themselves that I didn't know before, whether they're gay or not, whatever it was, something that they hadn't told me before. It encourages other people to come out and talk about themselves.
We hear that a lot, Ray. So, as a head teacher, I had the privilege of sitting in the assembly hall when my deputy head did her coming out speech. And it was exactly for the same reason as you said there. It was about making it personal. There were things being said that were inappropriate, but they were about third person people outside of the building. And she came to me one day and she said, like, Hannah, I need to do this because they don't realize that what they're saying about other people is actually hurting me. And I think that making it personal, bringing the humanity to the prejudice, I think is is a turning point, I think, for the people who are perhaps spouting that hate. I'm just interested to have your thoughts on allyship. As a straight, white, able-bodied woman, like I'm very conscious of my privilege, and I do my best to try and help people who are marginalised or people who are underrepresented, kind of like A, find their voice, but B, feel safe. And I'm wondering about the kind of the allies who have perhaps helped you on your journey and supported you with some of these pivotal moments.
Well, definitely, as I said at the beginning, I'm thankful to a lot of friends who have supported me and helped me along and helped me to come out and so on. And I find now that being an ally is a bit of a challenge for me because being a gay man in the present climate in this country, at least in Britain, being a gay man is a fairly acceptable thing. It's not. It's a privilege by comparison with other people, even people who are bisexual, and particularly people who are transgender or non-binary. And I've begun to learn more about these people and to come to understand and learn about their experience. So I've had allies that have helped me, and now I'm called, in a sense, to be an ally to other people who are different from me.
Ray, how about negative reaction? I'm sure that throughout the last 80 plus years, there has been negativity. How do you handle it when it happens?
Um, it depends actually on the spirit in which it's given. There are some people who Christians who are sincere and gracious, who don't believe that it's right to practice homosexuality, but who are at least gracious and respectful, and in a way I can respect that attitude. But when people are really hostile, I don't try to argue. I think just personal testimony is the thing. I just say, well, I'm gay, and I believe that God loves me, and that and I don't have any sense of guilt about it, and this is my experience. I could argue all day about the biblical texts and how to interpret them and so on, but I generally don't bother about that. I just talk about my own experience and say, well, this is me, take it or leave it.
And how about in your work at the university, kind of supporting young people who are away from home for the first time? And from my understanding, like a lot of young people, perhaps that's when they first come out because they're in a different space away from home. I'm just wondering about the kind of the work you do supporting those young adults as they transition into a different chapter in their own lives.
Well, through the LGBT plus staff network, we offer role models and we try to encourage, reassure people. And also, of course, in my work as a chaplain, people sometimes come to a chaplain for pastoral support and advice and so on. And we listen to them, listen to their story, and do our best to support and encourage them. Maybe link them up with supportive groups and that kind of thing. We just, I mean, if people don't tell us, we don't know. But because we make our attitude clear, they're usually not afraid to tell us. And when they tell us, well, then we have to work according to that particular person's circumstances and support them as best we can.
What these young people, what is it that they're going through? I want to be a better ally. I have my daughter's best friend is transitioning. I have a niece who committed suicide because of who went through just the difficulty of acknowledging gender identity. And I know it's happening. Like this is happening regularly from where I come from in the Philippines. And what, as teachers, as parents, as adults, I mean, what is it that we need to know or understand that might help us become better allies to young people going through this difficult period in their lives and trying to just figure out their gender identities? Is there an insight that you can give us as to what the experience is like?
What it varies with different people, of course. And I say the main thing we can do is listen to their story, not assume because they're in a certain category we know how they feel and what they experience. We have to just listen to the individual. And a lot of people are, as you suggested, partly out. They come away from home and they feel free then in the university setting to be open, but still not at home. They have this very, very challenging experience of coming out to parents, which, because I mean, we never talked about when I was young, and my parents died fairly young, so I never had to come out to my parents. I've come out to other members of the family since with sort of mixed reactions, but yeah, we have to, I think, just listen to people and try to support them and know their story and take an interest in their story as well, because I'm very thankful personally when people ask me about my own experience as a gay man. They wonder if they're intruding, but to me it's not intruding because it's helping me to talk about it. And I think a lot of people need encouragement to talk. It's possible sometimes to be too intrusive, but there's a thin line to be drawn. And I
Thank you, Ray. I just want to say thank you, Isa, as well, for sharing, like, being courageous and sharing your vulnerability and your own story there as well. What I'm hearing, Ray, is about it's listening and it's about creating listening spaces, safe spaces. And I think sometimes that's part of the problem in schools in particular, because schools are so busy, the timetable is so tight. It's creating those spaces for those young people. And like you say, it's also the time for when they do come that you can like listen to them and truly listen to them. And I'm just wondering whether there's any tips there from your work in the chaplaincy at a university back to the education system about how they can create these safe listening spaces for young people to articulate their stories and also create those safe conditions for young people to perhaps ask those staff who they know are out about their own personal narratives, because I think that's really really important wisdom there about like permission to actually have a two-way conversation.
Yes, I think the main thing is to make it clear that this is possible. To make it clear publicly that if people want to talk, they can. The advantage we have with the chaplaincy, of course, is that we're not integrated with any particular department in the university. So whatever people say to us will have no influence on their academic career or on their jobs, because we speak with, we support staff as well as students. So it's something that separates. Maybe that maybe not quite so easy in the case of relationship with a teacher and the pupil, but I think the best thing is to make it public, to make it known so that everybody knows that there will be a chance to talk. Although, as you say, with the time factors and so on, it's more difficult perhaps in schools than it is in with the chaplaincy and higher education.
I know that at the beginning we were asking you questions on how, going back to the church and how not everyone has been supportive and all that. I think it's really ironic that actually the church has a massive capacity to help in this, don't they? Like practices of having faith, praying helps. I would also want to give you the opportunity to talk about the things that the church does, what having faith does to help in this agenda.
Well, in my younger days, when I was, very, very lonely, and not out at all, I found great consolation in faith and prayer. I love the prayer of Saint Francis. Grant that I may seek not so much to be understood as to understand, not so much to be loved as to love, and that's that was so to me a positive challenge to concentrate on understanding and loving other people instead of just longing to be loved and understood by others, and that's very good. And the whole belief that God is love. I mean, that is the heart of Christian faith, and and God loves variety. It's obvious from creation. There's a vast variety of life, and God loves people to be different. And we have the example of Jesus reaching out to all the kinds of people who in his day were looked down upon by others. And there are even one or two stories in the Bible where you can see where you can see the relevance to gay people. There's that lovely story about the Roman army officer who came to Jesus desperate because his slave, whom he loved, was very ill, and having faith that Jesus could heal him. And Jesus didn't comment, and we know what the relationship generally was between Roman officers and their houseboys, and would be very much disapproved of by, particularly by Jewish society at the time. But Jesus made no comments. In fact, he admired the man's faith. And there's a lovely story about the Apostle Philip, who met an Ethiopian eunuch, and who had been to Jerusalem because presumably he wanted to worship God in Jerusalem, but he wouldn't have been admitted to the inner congregation because he was a eunuch. There was a law in the Bible against that, and Philip sort of opened his eyes to the meaning of that passage in Isaiah about the one who is despised and rejected of men, and the eunuch suddenly realized that he could be baptized and he could become part of the holy community, which he had never been fully part of before. So there's lots of encouragement I find in the Bible and in the Christian faith. And more and more people, I think, in the churches are seeing this.
Thank you, Ray, for sharing those sort of like stories with us. And I'm interested in your reference back at the beginning about the army and the kind of the patriarchal structures in society. And we know the church historically has been a very patriarchal space as well. And I'm just wondering whether is that one of the issues that we need to navigate via society, via church, that actually is it the patriarchal relationships that are problematic when it comes to this inclusion of LGBTQI people, do you think?
Yes, it is a factor in the situation. But of course, as gender equality is becoming more and more the normal thing in Western society today, that is improving, I think. I'm very proud. I'm not an Anglican myself, but I'm very proud of the church in Wales because it has 6 bishops, and exactly 50% of them, 3 are women, and that's I think that's a great step forward. And I think that sense of patriarchal attitudes is a factor, and it's being diminished, fortunately, but it's still there.
So I want to refer to one of the questions in the comment section. So someone is asking, because of course you've seen how the LGBT agenda evolved throughout the years. So someone's asking, what is it exactly that some people today, this day and age, fear about the LGBT agenda? So yes, that's her question. So it's Leah.
I think a lot of it is fear. A lot of it is people who are unwilling to recognize what's in themselves. I have the feeling that a lot of the most vociferous anti-gay people are people who know that they're gay themselves or have that tendency and are ashamed of it and terrified of it, and they attack it in other people because they're in a way defending their own sense of self-esteem. I think that's quite an important factor, that pattern of fear, because people are so extreme. It amazes me how there are lots of things that are wrong in the eyes of many of Christians, but somehow or other homosexuality seems to be more wrong than anything else. Often, some people are just obsessed with it. They almost have the feeling that to be gay is worse than being a murderer. And I think there's a sort of fear within that's speaking there. And when people say that, if you encourage people to be gay, well, the human race will die out because nobody will have children anymore. They're saying something about themselves. That they're assuming that other people are all like themselves.
Great question, Sharifa. Thank you for that, and great response, Ray. And I'm interested. From what I've seen in society, there's a double standard sometimes for gay men versus lesbian women, and there seems to be more fear and more hate, perhaps, from the anecdotes I've listened to, towards men in particular. Is that something you've observed, or something that you've noticed and heard through your conversation?
You mean the fact that lesbians are not sort of looked down upon so much as gay men? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I don't want to speak on behalf of people. I just, from conversations I've listened to and behaviours I've witnessed in the education system, I'm aware that gay men seem to receive a lot of the hate, and there seems to be more fear and hate. And I'm just wondering about this, like this concept of masculinity, and whether that's part of the problem, and also the fear then fuels itself into hate via violence as well. And I'm just wondering whether that's one of the differences, perhaps, between the different parts of the LGBTQI community, and how they're received and how they're hated.
Yes, I think that's very true, actually. Traditionally, of course, it's been very acceptable for women to show affection to one another. And maybe it doesn't happen quite so much now because people are afraid of being labelled as lesbian, but it used to be quite a common thing to see two women friends walking along arm in arm, and kissing each other and so on. And whereas because of patriarchal attitudes, that wasn't so acceptable with men. And so, in a way, lesbianism was less visible, really, and less frowned upon, because it's these stereotyped images of what's masculine and what's feminine, that showing close affection in front of other people is all right for women, but not all right for men.
That's so interesting. It's making me think. And I think I can ask this question because I'm an immigrant, right? I've stepped into the UK and I've noticed this. But why is it different? Like Wales, Scotland, and England, the way that the response to this is different. So culturally, well, let's talk about culture, deeply held beliefs. Is there something about the Welsh or the Scots that seem to find this easier than the Anglican Church? I mean, is there an angle to that as well when we're talking about culture?
I'm not sure about that, really. In a way, Wales and Scotland, with their Protestant tradition, have been, in a sense, more traditional and more judgmental than England. But now they seem to be ahead of England in moving towards acceptance of gay people and so on. And I think it's I don't know, really. It's maybe the Church of England, particularly, of course, is a very multi-class thing, and lots of people with quite traditional social attitudes are in the Church of England, whereas maybe in Wales the churches are more, and in Scotland the churches are more of the ordinary people, and more inclined to be tolerant. So I don't know. It's hard to say, really. It's very difficult to judge what the difference is culturally.
Yeah, it's a really interesting lens to look through, isn't it? And we know that class isn't a protected characteristic, but we know there is an issue when it comes to class as a prejudice and a discrimination as well. And I'm really struck by something that happened to me when I was 19. I went to Africa for the second time. I went to Ghana for 3 months, and I was fascinated by watching all these men walking around holding hands, because it was culturally acceptable for men in public who were friends and brothers and cousins, they weren't lovers, to walk around holding hands. And I think your reference there to affection and those kind of social expectations or social norms, social usuals around how we interact are really interesting. And really, your question there, Isa, about Scotland and Wales. I mean, I absolutely agree with you, Ray, about they've overtaken England in progress in lots of ways, because educationally they've had a massive reform in those two countries as well. And I know there's some really intentional work happening about how to lift the education system up. And I do worry that England's just lagging further and further behind in lots of facets. And my question to you, Ray, is about perhaps looking to the future. What are your hopes? What are your hopes for the future, for society, for the church, for the LGBTQ community? Like, what are some of the things that you hope will change in the future?
Several things, really. As far as churches are concerned, I hope that soon they will actually come to terms with the question and really come out and say, it's not sinful to be gay. I hope that will come. And I feel that is one of the battlegrounds now, because in society generally it's more and more accepted that you have to deal with the churches. That's one thing. Another is I would hope for greater visibility, because it's ironic really that now it's legal for two men to be married to each other. But how often do you see two men walking down the street holding hands? It's still there's still that sort of taboo about visibility. And the other thing, of course, is the international issue. I mean, particularly being in the university, I meet lots of people of different nationalities, and of course, in many countries, it is very, very grim still. There are people who are imprisoned, people who have been even executed just for being gay, I think that's something I hope to see change. It really is such a huge difference between the measure of acceptance that we have in this country, in Britain, which is not perfect, but it's vastly better than the situation in many other countries. And you have people who are refugees because of their sexuality. So I do hope to see that change as we become more, I suppose, globally conscious and we influence one another culturally.
But how about for you, Ray? What's next for you? I mean, what are you planning to do for the rest of the year, next year? I'm asking because I'm wondering, is there any way we can help you?
Well, thanks for that. I mean, this has been a great opportunity for me. I want to be an advocate, and to be on this webcast is a great opportunity, and I would like much more opportunity to talk. I think particularly with churches, because that's where my work is, and that's where the problem is mainly today, and I would like more opportunity to discuss the issue with people, and to help people understand. That's I mean, I'm getting old now and a bit lacking in energy and stamina sometimes, but I'd like to use the rest of my life to do that kind of thing.
But you're a YouTube star now, Ray. You can do all this from your home with your headset, so you don't need to travel. You don't need to travel anywhere. And I'm interested in what you said there about visibility, because I think that's definitely something that we can all collectively work on. Is about amplifying people's voices and amplifying those stories and sharing them. And that's what you're doing. You are being courageous, stepping into this space, but you're also opening the door and giving permission to other people to share their story as well. And I just wondered whether you could share with us, like, any of the opportunities that have come to you as a result of being named the Stonewall Champion of 2019. Like, I'm sure at your age, that's an amazing accolade to receive. And what invitations have you received that surprised you or interested you?
Well, I've received invitations to speak at a few meetings and so on, and the chaplaincy and the church I belong to celebrated the award for very encouraging, and one of the effects of being Gay Role Model of the Year was that it brought a certain amount of regret in a way, because one or two people wrote to me and came out to me telling me they were gay, and I'd known them for a long time, and I just felt that I could have helped them a lot more if I'd been open much sooner. Particularly one young man that I'd known all his life. I remember him being born, and I had no idea that he was gay. When he told me, I thought, and he said that he was battling with his Christian faith and his sexuality, and I just wish that I had been more open at an earlier stage, when he was growing up. And there is that sense, coming out late in life as I did, there is that sense of regret sometimes. It's, I could have been helpful to more people if I'd come out sooner. I'm glad that bit more open now.
Well, I don't think it's never too late, and I think that maybe because you lived the life that you did, that you held off up until this point, that makes you special in a way, and that your message and the way that you help people, really comes from, like experience of with challenging experience. So I wish for you that more opportunities to help other people, maybe more platforms that people can interview as a result of our webcast. Maybe anyone out there who wants to interview Ray, please contact Ray. I want to link to the guest we had last week and the guest we're going to have. So the guest we had last week and the guest we're going to have next week, because they're both LGBT advocates and they do a lot of work in raising awareness at schools, at primary school. I'm wondering, is there any insight maybe that you can give them, or insight on how how best to do that, working with talking about LGBT at primary school?
I have seen a great example of it, actually. I was invited with my chaplain that I work with to go to a primary school to talk about Christianity. Really, it was part of the religious studies. The subject came up about sexuality, and I was really very pleasantly, well, surprised in a way that this school was so enlightened. They actually, the children actually been led in a project about love and about love knowing no boundaries and so on. And so, it woke me up to the fact that it is possible, even among very young children, to get this message. And of course, a lot of young people are much more open. Some of them, I mean, there is bullying in schools, of course. It varies, but a lot of young people are much more open and accepting of different sexualities, and sometimes challenge their parents. And I think that's. I mean, I've got no experience personally of primary schools apart from, I say, that one and one or two others. But it is good to see that this kind of thing is being done in primary schools. And as far as slightly older people are concerned, um, I would, I think one word of advice I would give to a young person who's gay is, apart from just listening to their circumstances, but one piece of advice I think I would give is avoid getting into any false relationship. Sometimes people take up with someone of the opposite sex just to try and cure themselves or prove that convince that they're not really gay, and that can be disastrous. I've made mistakes like that in the past. I'm very fortunate that I'm not, unlike many gay men, I never actually got married to a woman. But that does happen, and does happen still. And I would advise anybody to avoid that, even if you don't come out as gay. It's good to come out. I would encourage anybody to come out, but sometimes it just seems to be impossible, and you can't push people into it. But at least try not to get involved in false relationships.
Thanks for that, Ray. Especially that last thing that you said. I have girlfriends who married gay men who came out later in the relationship, and I know firsthand from some of my friends how hard that was. And it's actually quite common. I don't know whether it's common in the UK, but it's quite common in the Philippines. So that's yeah. Thank you for that. I think that's it, Hannah. We've run out of time. So Ray, any final words of advice or message you would like to leave our audience?
It's okay to be gay. It's if you're religious, it's a gift from God. And it used to be thought of as a problem or an issue, but it's not. It's a gift, and that's something that I've come to realise in the course of my life, and I hope other people can realise it as well.
And Hannah, how about you? What's your take out?
I'm quite struck by your beautiful words there, Ray. Mine's about the visibility. I think it's what can we all collectively do to increase the visibility, and how can we usualize the fact that it is okay to be gay, and there are a lot of gay people in the world, and let's just create those safe spaces for everyone to be themselves. How about you, Isa? What are you taking away as a nugget from today?
Well, Ray, you've inspired me. You know, I'm thinking church gets such a bad press sometimes about this, but actually it is a source of inspiration and comfort. And I'm getting excited because I'm already thinking of how I would market you, Ray, of prayers from the Bible that helps the gay community, the stories from the Bible that supports the gay community. I mean, how about that? Instead of the things that's against it, there are things that's for it. So let's promote that some more, right? So I'm getting really excited. So that's it. That's my insight. So Hannah, do you want to introduce or talk about our next guest next week?
I sure can. So we only have two episodes left of our pilot, and we're really happy that next week we have secured Andrew Moffat, MBE, to join us. Andrew is someone who I've been trying to meet for several years. We've also got him as being the keynote at one of the Diverse Ed events this year, so I'm really excited. He is an advocator and a kind of a lead educator. He got nominated for the Global Teacher Prize, in fact, for his campaign No More Outsiders, which is a brilliant educational programme that started in primary schools, but secondary schools can now engage as well. He's written stacks of books and educational resources, and basically he teaches about diversity, tolerance and acceptance in education. So hopefully a really practical session about things that educators and governors can do this academic year to create those cultures of inclusion for everybody in schools. So thank you so much for your time this morning, Ray. We've really, really enjoyed talking to you. It's been very insightful. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your honesty and your courage. So goodbye from me, Isa and Ray, and we'll see you very, very soon. Take care.
Well, thank you very much, Sue, and goodbye and good wishes to you all.